Okay. Good morning and welcome to Epilepsy WA's Epilepsy Stress Management and You seminar. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a great pleasure to be with you. And as I said, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I'll try and keep on top of any questions or comments that come through. I'm very used to presenting face-to-face, so there's going to be times when I'm going to be looking to you for an answer, and of course none is going to come, so I apologise for that, but I'm sure I'll get the hang of it as we go. So let's start. Oh, I must, of course, first of all, give thanks to UCB, who have been kind enough to sponsor us through this seminar program. So we are extremely grateful for their support. So let's start and think about why we decided to run this particular seminar first. Stress itself is the most frequently self-identified seizure trigger for people with epilepsy. So basically that means that for anyone who has epilepsy, most people are most aware that stress for them they believe is a precipitant to seizure activity. The interesting thing, however, is that human studies are yet to conclusively prove this. Reason being is that the concept of stress is what they call subjective. So my perception of what is stressful may well be very different to your experience of what is stressful. So how we experience it, what causes the stress, will widely vary with each individual. So instead, what studies like to say is that stress exacerbates the potential for seizures in certain individuals with epilepsy. Interestingly enough, though, there was a recent study which was done in February or published in February this year that did find that stress reduction techniques appear to reduce the seizure frequency in individuals with medication-resistant epilepsy. So I guess it's almost like a backdoor way of trying to conclusively prove the link between epilepsy and stress. In that particular study, they had 44 participants who were taken through a 12-week stress management program based around what's known as progressive muscle relaxation. That's something we'll discuss a little later. So the one group had progressive muscle relaxation taught to them throughout the process. The other control group had a generalised stress management program with exercises that mimicked the role that the muscles play in progressive muscle relaxation. What they did find was that in roughly majority of cases, there was a reduction in seizure frequency of approximately 25% over that 12-week period. So I think that's pretty conclusive evidence that there certainly is a link, but also I think we can't afford to ignore the feedback that comes from the people who are living with epilepsy, of course. In my work with Epilepsy WA, I think probably one of the things that I've become most profoundly aware of is the impact that epilepsy has not just on the individual but on the family as well. Loved ones, family members, friends all report increased stress and anxiety when it comes to looking after their loved one. That anxiety associated with, will the person have a seizure? When is the next seizure coming from? For some of them, it's what type of seizure will it be? So epilepsy in itself is very much caught up in a web of stress. And of course, excessive stress has clearly been identified through scientific studies that to have negative effects on the individual. So really, regardless of where the stress is coming from, the better we are at managing our stress, the healthier and happier we can be. So what I'm hoping to do today is to take you through a little bit of an understanding about what stress is, a way of conceptualizing that, and also having a look at ways that are particularly practical strategies that we can use to work on managing that stress effectively. So let's start with what is stress. I mean, we're all very aware of that. It's something that we experience when we face a situation and our ability to cope is challenged. So I've just realized I need to pop my timer on so I don't run over time. Can't do two things at once, clearly. There we go. So it's what we experience when we face a situation and our ability to cope with that situation is challenged. Stresses can rise from any aspect of our lives, be they professional, personal, environmental, it doesn't really matter. What is important to note, however, is that not all stress is bad. When we talk about stress management, we're not actually talking about aiming for an absence of stress in our lives. What we do need is we need some stress, and that what they call positive stress is what will motivate us and energize us. If you think about it, when we have places to go, we have workplaces, we have school runs, we have all those things, they are what get us up and going in the morning. So that element of demand is actually quite positive in that it motivates and energizes us. If we are under stressed, which can happen particularly when looking at depression or periods of inactivity, we tend to find that we feel bored, we're flat, and we lack that energy and enthusiasm for life. So not all stress is a bad thing. But obviously stress over an extended period can certainly have well-documented negative effects on an individual. So physically, it's things like digestive issues, headaches, high blood pressure, and so on. Mentally, it's those aspects of things like our forgetfulness, racing thoughts, poor concentration. Emotionally being, like I mentioned, depression, anxiety, anger, or irritability. And unfortunately, over a long period of time, we can turn to what are known as unhelpful coping strategies. So those strategies that perhaps potentially, while maybe relieving stress in the moment, can have a long-term negative effect. Okay. Just want to make sure that no one's got in touch with me. Okay. So what I wanted to share with you now, sorry, I have to keep remembering to look at the camera, is what's known as the 5 aspects of life model. And this was developed by Greenberger as part of cognitive behavioural therapy, which is a psychological treatment principle. For those that don't know me, I've spent an extensive period, over 20 years, working in mental health. So it's something that's particularly close to my heart and something I'm extremely interested in. Now, the reason I like this 5 aspects of life is that it breaks down, I guess, how we live into 5 key components, 4 of which belong to the individual and 1 which is external to them, which is obviously, in this case, as you can see, the environment. Now, the environment isn't just the physical environment, that also involves things like the circumstances in which something is occurring. The other 4 aspects are our thoughts, our feelings, our physical reactions, and our behaviours. So the difference between physical reactions and behaviours, physical reactions are those things that are out of our control. So we're looking at things like blood pressure, sweating, that generalised, for example, stress response, while behaviours are things that we choose to do, the way that we respond to this. Now, the lovely thing about this model is it actually shows us that these 5 aspects of life are all interconnected. So when you look at one or consider one, a change in that particular aspect is actually going to flow through and impact on all the other factors. So if I can get my cursor away, you can see here. So for example, if we're looking at thinking, how we think impacts on how we behave, how we feel, and how our body responds as well. So this model is incredibly useful when it actually comes to trying to conceptualize a problem or an issue that we're looking at. So it helps us to break it down and consider, when I'm looking at this problem, let's say, for example, stress, it gives me an in. It helps me to take something that can be seen as overwhelming and actually make it quite practical. So we can look at, is it the environment that's stressing me? Is it my thinking or my feelings and so on that are causing the issue? And by breaking them down into these 5 aspects, what we can find is that it gives us places to start when it comes to implementing strategies. So, for example, if I can change how I think into a more positive, less stress-inducing way, that's going to change how I feel and so on. So we're going to refer to this model throughout the presentation on and off, but I just like it because it makes something that's incredibly complex far more simple and far easier to manage. Okay, so what I want us to think about now, I guess, is how does stress impact on you as an individual? Today's society is so fast-paced and so busy that very often many of us come to feel stress so often that it becomes normal. It's almost like it's our baseline to have some degree of stress at all times, and we become used to that stressed, overburdened feeling. But if we're going to look at challenging that, we actually need to be aware of what's going on within us. So it's almost like a two-pronged approach. So first thing is considering what are the things that actually cause us stress. Is there a particular person, for example? Is it a particular place? For example, a classic example would be the workplace. Is that a source of stress for you? Is it something like our thoughts or our situations we tend to think often it's things external to us that are causing the problem, when in actual fact, very often, it's how we are perceiving a situation that is causing the stress. It is how we're behaving that, unbeknownst to us, is actually causing us some stress. And this is why having the idea of those 5 aspects is so important, because it starts to give us a clearer picture of what actually is going on. The second thing to consider is, how do we know that we are stressed? So what are your warning signs? As I mentioned earlier, how I experience stress may be very different for you. One of my key indicators that I'm getting really wound up is I get a tick in my right eye. It's not one that's visible, but it feels to me like my right eyelid is fluttering. That may not be an issue for you. So when we're looking at what are your warning signs or the indicators of stress, consider things like we did earlier with the 5 aspects, the physical. So is it that you realise that you get more headaches than usual? Do you get butterflies or an upset stomach? Emotionally wise, is it that you are very aware that you become anxious a lot of the time? Is it that your mood drops and you have feelings of depression? Psychologically, we're looking at how we're thinking. Is my thinking muddled? Am I unable to get a clear thought? Can I not problem solve? Am I finding it very difficult to see the wood for the tree, so to speak? Or behaviourally, do I start becoming less tolerant of others? Do I isolate myself? What are the behaviours that present in you when you are stressed? So even though perhaps we're not going to have time to do that now, I really encourage you to start thinking about, what does stress look like for you? Keep those 5 aspects in mind and see if you can actually plot out for you what is going on and what does it look like. They say knowledge is power. So I can't make changes until I know what it is that I need to change. So it's really important to take the time to get that particular snapshot. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, I've just got to find mine. There it is. Okay. Now, I have many talents. One of them is not drawing clearly, as you can see from this diagram. But what I wanted to do was to share with you what's known as the stress cup metaphor. It's incredibly useful when it comes to giving us an image of what stress is, as well as the role that stress management has to play. So consider yourself, if you will, and I hope you can see my little cursor here. Consider yourself this abnormally shaped, uneven beaker. And in our beaker, at the bottom of everybody's beaker, what we need is what we call that positive stress I mentioned, that motivating factor, that energizing factor. Now, in everybody's cup, regardless, there is going to be this unhelpful stress. And this unhelpful stress are the stresses and strains of everyday living. So it's those feelings of running late. It's those feelings of being overburdened at work, relationship issues and what have you. And the greater the stressor, the more stress that we have in this cup here. Now, up here at the top, I've drawn what we call trigger points or buttons. And this is when we hit, I guess, what we call our optimum level of stress. It's amazing what any human can endure. Very often under times of great stress and duress, we tend to find ourselves thinking, I can't cope, and yet we do, because we have to, and we have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. But we all have this trigger point or this element of stress. So these are our trigger points, and these trigger points are when we reach these, we tend to find that we result in an extreme reaction, whether that might be an emotional breakdown, an emotional outburst, or something along those lines. So ultimately what we want to do is we want to avoid that trigger point. Now, this is, believe it or not, meant to be a faucet and a tap. I know it looks a little bit like a flower, but I promise you that's what it's meant to be. And this is, I guess, the most important part of this model. This is our release valve. And through activating this release valve, this is how we empty this unhelpful stress and how we reduce the level of stress in our stress cup. And the way to activate this valve is to engage in stress management techniques, similar to the ones we're going to be discussing a bit later on. But the important point that I want to make is that stress management is our responsibility. Nobody else is going to be able to turn on that release valve in our stress cup other than ourselves. So I really want to charge you throughout this seminar to think about the fact that your stress management belongs to you. The effectiveness is going to come down to how much effort you put into applying these strategies. So I really want to charge you with that. If you're going to look at effectively managing your stress, this is something that needs to belong to you. Okay, I'll just check to make sure there's no questions. No. Okay. All right. So let's slide into then our stress management techniques. When it comes to stress management, I like to think of two things. I like to call them, first of all, we have our gatekeepers. And there's a lovely little illustration chosen in honour of the royal wedding that took place in London the other week. These gatekeepers are our long-term strategies that we put in place that are there to help us to, I guess, almost have a constant flow coming out of that stress release valve on our stress cup. So these are the things that help us to keep our everyday level of unhealthy stress at a minimum. So these are things like, and we're going to go through each of these in turn shortly, our healthy lifestyle choices, our self-care, and setting healthy boundaries. And healthy lifestyle choices is a given, and it's pretty easy, but self-care and setting healthy boundaries are actually quite complex and can be quite a challenging thing to consider. So when we get to that, I want you to keep an open mind, because sometimes I'm very aware people kind of have a look at that and shudder a little. All right. So we have our gatekeepers. These are those that stand guard and help hold the fort, so to speak. But of course, as with life, there are ebbs and flows, there are ups and downs. So we also have what we know as the reinforcements. And these are the dudes that we call for in the moment when we're feeling that level of stress is getting to a point that we're feeling really distressed or uncomfortable. So in this case, what we're going to explore today are the principles of mindfulness, of challenging stressful thoughts, and relaxation skills. And we're going to finish off by me taking you through a brief relaxation session, I guess, which hopefully you'll enjoy, and hopefully you'll be too relaxed to ask me any pressing questions at the end. It's all part of my evil plan. Okay. All right, so let's start with our gatekeepers. These, as I mentioned, are those long-term strategies that we can use to help us to keep that level of stress in our stress cup to a minimum. Okay. Style are well known by everybody, so we'll just sort of brush across these and just see how we go. Okay, so first of all, obviously, eating well, so avoiding foods with lots of salt, sugar, fat, and the like. In this regard, things with these sort of additives or unhealthy options tend to make you tired. Obviously, our body can't run as well as if the fuel that we're feeding it is not pure fuel, so to speak. So we feel that we find ourselves tired and we find ourselves vulnerable to stress. Caffeine, I mentioned as a separate point, in the sense that obviously caffeine is a stimulant. So using caffeine may certainly give us that initial oomph, but afterwards comes the crash where we feel that fatigue almost, it seems like it's almost worse than it was before we had the caffeine in the first place. So we want to look at eating well and avoiding stimulants. Next, we look at, I guess, what we might call some of these unhealthy coping strategies that we discussed earlier. So obviously avoiding smoking is one, which is the long-term effects of that are well known. Again, in the moment, sometimes what we find with smoking is that it's almost like it's the act of lighting a cigarette that almost becomes a trigger for a relaxation response. So it's almost like a disconnect from what's going on around us. So people become very addicted to that habit of, I light up, I feel relaxed. Unfortunately, obviously, the health effects are, negative health effects are quite profound. So it's something we want to avoid. And we can set up a similar, almost triggered relaxation response using other more healthy strategies. Also, what we want to avoid is excessive use of alcohol and illicit drugs, obviously. With alcohol, yep, we do, again, get that initial sense of relief when we have that glass of wine. However, drinking to excess, obviously in itself is an issue, but alcohol is a depressant, so it tends to lower our mood, which means we are less able to manage any stressors that come our way. And also, alcohol tends to be processed when we sleep. So if we do drink to excess and then we go and think we're going to have a good night's sleep it off, what actually happens is we may sleep, but the quality of sleep is actually impaired because the body is busy processing the alcohol that we had consumed. So, and as you are all aware, part of effectively managing stress, but also effectively managing our epilepsy and reducing the potential for seizures, is to actually sleep well and to have good quality sleep. Sleep hygiene is just the term that people use to discuss the principles around which we set up ourselves for sleep. So, for example, it's about doing those things that are going to encourage you to sleep. So they suggest no caffeine after 4 in the afternoon. They suggest not eating for 2 to 3 hours before going to bed, so that when you go to bed, your body has already well and truly established the pattern of digestion. So you're not, again, quality of sleep being compromised by the body churning away and processing the evening's meal. Things like getting the environment right in terms of things like light, making sure the sound, if sound is an issue for you, that the room is silent. Temperature plays a really important part, making sure that you're not too hot or too cold. And the other key, I guess, is that, like I mentioned earlier with smoking, where it's the act that triggers almost a placebo effect of relaxation. Experts suggest that when it comes to sleep, that we use our bedroom only for sleep and for sex. Issue then being, of course, that in today's world we are so surrounded by screens. We have TVs in our bedrooms, we have our phones with us all the time, almost as extensions of who we are, and it's very difficult to break that habit once that habit is established. But if you can persist, they say it takes 30 days to break a habit or 30 days to create a new one. In eliminating screens and things prior to going to bed and when in the bedroom, that very simple act of going into your bedroom to prepare for sleep can actually be a trigger for an appropriate and suitable good night's rest. And lucky last is exercise, of course. The recommended, as we all know, is to have 30 minutes of exercise a day, and thankfully they discovered that that can be done in 10-minute lots, because let's be honest, a lot of us are quite time poor. So, but the important thing is to keep moving. Exercise, when we do exercise, it improves our physical health, but it also improves our mental health, in that, of course, when we exercise, we release endorphins, which are known as the happy hormones, so we feel better. The other thing too, I guess, is that it works on, if you're like me, muscle tension. Gosh, as I can feel now, is a real issue, and somewhere where I store my stress. So the physical act of exercise is about stretching and lengthening and using those muscles and not allowing them to become so tight and so locked. So very simple, and I'm sure you all know, but healthy lifestyle choices go a long way to helping us manage our stress. Sorry, I lost my cursor. Okay. Next point is reducing stress through self-care. And I have a wry smile, because working in mental health, the biggest challenge I had was trying to convince people of the importance and the value of self-care. Often, certainly when working, I used to work for a long time with veterans, and mentioning self-care, their thoughts of self-care included things like making sure you were shaved, showered, and had clean clothes on, which of course are all part of the process. But I'm talking about that deeper sense of self-care, caring for the whole self, body, mind, and soul. And self-care is simply that. It's about attending to your needs and doing things simply because they're good for you. And it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. But the better we are at self-care, the better we are at keeping excessive and negative stress at bay. And it doesn't take much. I think sometimes when talking to the partners of veterans, the idea of what is self-care would be, I can go and get my hair cut, or I can go and get a massage. And absolutely, they're brilliant examples of that, but they require time and they require money. And effective self-care doesn't actually require a lot of either. So it's about being creative and thinking about, how can I best look after me? So let's have a look at how we might do that. So self-care occurs when we socialise and connect with others. Certainly, I know in myself, and writing this presentation has been actually really good for me, in the sense of helping me to re-clarify how I respond to stress and what I do and don't do so effectively. And one of the things I've realised that I do is that the more stressed I am, the more likely I am to isolate. I don't reach out, I don't ask for help. It's almost like I kind of batten down the hatches and hold on and think I can do this. which in a way, of course it does, it contributes to further stress because there's that ongoing sense of I've got to do this on my own or nobody can help me. Reaching out and being with others is incredibly important. Humans are social beings. We're not designed to be on our own. So socializing with others simply for the pure pleasure of doing so, or connect with others, share with them, family and friends, what's going on with you and for you at the time. This idea of sharing and disclosing what might be causing you stress is actually really powerful in the sense that it gives us ownership, so we're sharing what matters to us. But what it also does is it gives us the opportunity to get two things. And the first is it helps us to realise that we aren't alone. So quite likely the person that you're sharing with had experienced a similar circumstance in the past, or perhaps maybe you've been walking through a similar process at the same time. So it helps us recognise we're not doing this alone. And secondly, what it does do is it actually also helps us to recognise that feeling stressed, feeling overwhelmed is not a sign of weakness. Very often the response, we tend to think that if we're stressed or not, we feel we're not coping, there's something wrong with us. By sharing with us, it's a reality check. We start to recognise that, gosh, that when someone turns to you and says, oh, for goodness sake, how could you be expected to react in any other way? That's incredibly reassuring and goes a long way to restoring that sense of what we call self-efficacy, that idea that I can manage this. So being with others, sharing with others and engaging with others is incredibly important. Okay, our second self-care strategy is to take time out or time away. Time out is exactly that. So in that moment when you are feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling stressed, going away, take a walk, disengaging from that, if you're struggling with a problem at work, if the kids are doing your head in, and you're able to, it's about that disconnect. Take time out and go and do something for the simple sake of doing something that gives you pleasure. Thanks to this presentation, during the last couple of weeks, I took myself off on my own to go and see a movie. I've got to say, I really enjoyed it. But it's something that, oh, sorry, Tracy, you've raised a hand, I see. I don't know how to do that, but I'm glad you have. If you could maybe type me a question, that would be brilliant, and then I can have a look at that. So I'll keep talking, Tracy, while hopefully we can find a way to do that. Okay, so time away is a little more than that in the sense that I sort of went to the movies on a whim, but time away is about actually scheduling into your, here we go, okay. All right. Okay. All right, I'll pause for a minute. So we were saying, what if socialising causes stress? There's actually nothing wrong with having time on your own. Everybody needs that space. The concern is that being on your own is absolutely fine as an option. The concern comes if it's your only option, if that makes sense. So, of course, if socialising causes you stress and it's not something that we want to be doing, I would possibly suggest that considering the way that the socialising occurs. Obviously, if there's people, it would be about socialising with people who you feel secure with. It would be about socialising in a place where you feel comfortable. It might even simply be having a discussion on Facebook or through messaging and all that kind of stuff. So there's no right or wrong answer ultimately, but I guess the concern comes is if we find ourselves completely isolated and we have no way of addressing that. I hope that answers your question, Tracy. Please ask again if it doesn't. So coming back to time away is about scheduling in time for yourself. And it's very easy to ignore and forget, and we put other people's needs above our own. However, if you schedule into your diary, there's a far greater chance that you'll actually follow through with it. So it's about being consistent and not allowing anything to intrude on that me time that we talk about. Okay. I've lost my little, there we go. Okay. I mentioned earlier that these ideas of self-care is about the whole person, mind, body and soul. So when it comes to self-care, it's about enjoying cultural, spiritual and social activities. By social, we mean it's a bit like the Act, Belong, Commit campaign that no doubt you all would have seen advertised from time to time. And that's about engaging with the community as a whole. So doing something that contributes, doing something that, I guess, enables us to give. Through which comes a sense of well-being, and can, if doing something that we love can be really good at reducing our stress. Cultural and spiritual, I guess I just really mean connecting with those parts of the soul of you, or those parts of you. So whether it's, spiritual doesn't necessarily mean religious in any way, shape or form. It might simply be communing with nature for you is incredibly important, and is a place where you find soothing. It could be through meditation or what have you, but it's about acknowledging that inner part of us, the soul, I guess, really, because I really want to be advocating with any self-care that it is that mind, body and soul that we look at. And lucky last, look for humour. I love a laugh. When used appropriately, humour is a brilliant way of actually managing and working through stress. Research has shown that laughter significantly improves our mood and has physical as well as psychological benefits. On now, in this electronic age, there are videos and GIFs and everything galore to actually help you find that giggle. If you want a recommendation for me, my go-to when I'm stressed is there's an English comedian called Michael McIntyre, who takes the absurdities of life, or the simplicities of life, and just makes you realise how ridiculous we are. One of my favourite sketches involves him talking about watching women get dressed and the stockings, how it all starts off so well, and then this tights we're talking here starts so well and just ends up in a bit of a debacle. He's an incredibly clever man. Another recommendation is on Netflix, a show called Gavin and Stacey as well, which is a British show. Clearly I've got a British sense of humour, but for me, gentle, lovely and incredibly funny. So I'm probably going to reveal a little more of myself than perhaps I should. I'm going to pop up for you now so you can have a minute to stretch. Some memes that I personally find absolutely hilarious, and hopefully I give you a bit of a giggle as well. So I can't look at them without laughing. And I would just put money that there are some of you sitting out there right now, for those of you who know who Billy Idol is and who know the song Why Wedding, that you'll never hear that song the same way again. And it's taking all my control not to demonstrate for you how that last line would go. Sorry, I can't help it. It makes me giggle every time. So, but again, these are things that are readily available, and it takes 2 seconds to find them, to look at them. There's a website called Dump a Day that I look at that does this kind of thing as well. And again, it's my go-to. Tracy says demonstrate. I don't know if that's wise, but look, basically it is all about the cardigan. All right, now it's done. I can refocus. I can hear Carolyn laughing at me now. But hey, I feel a lot more relaxed than I did a little earlier. There you go, Tracy. Don't say I'm not responsive to my audience. Oh, another comment's coming through. Oh, you're very welcome. Okay, so let's move on. All right, our last gatekeeper is setting boundaries, which is quite a volatile topic, actually, for many people. This idea of boundaries and where to draw the line can be incredibly challenging. So what are boundaries? And if I had you here right now, I would actually be asking you that very same question. Thank you, Ian, for your kind comment. As I said, I can't see you, so I'm going to assume that you're all just rolling with laughter at those memes, by the way. That's a nice thing of not being able to receive that immediate feedback. But on the other side of the coin, as I said, I can't be asking you the questions that I would normally ask you. So what are boundaries? Boundaries help us to build healthy relationships. They establish the guidelines through which we work, and look at our behaviours and responsibilities. So it's about what I will and won't do. Establishing boundaries is not about what others will and won't do. It belongs to the individual, and it's not about others to follow. So very often, and the reason I talk about boundaries is that if our boundaries are lax, we find it incredibly difficult to know where we start and where someone else begins. We often find ourselves overburdened. We find ourselves stressed. We find ourselves often responsible for things that don't actually belong to us. And those things lead to, of course, feelings of stress, but also feelings of resentment and distress as well. So I wanted to think about what are a couple of the tips for setting these healthy boundaries that we talk about. And the first is learning to say no. Oh, see, this is one I'm not particularly good at. And usually if we find that we are struggling with our load or we're taking on more than we can manage, it generally comes down to the fact that we find it very difficult to say no. And very often the reason for that is that the idea of saying no causes us to feel guilt or causes us to great discomfort. And we assume because it feels bad, then that action must be bad, which is actually not true. If you think about it, for example, I know that it's not good for me to sit down on the couch with a giant bag of crisps and eat the whole bag. I know I'm going to feel guilty, but I still do it anyway. So we tend to be quite subjective with those, as to which emotional responses we do and don't follow through with. When it comes to no and those feelings of guilt, what tends to happen is it's coming up against what's known as a core belief. So I'll pop into my psych background for a minute. But the core belief tends to be things like, for example, everybody's needs are more important than mine, or if I'm not all things to all people, then I'm not valuable. So when this idea of saying no pops up, we hit that belief. And because we're thinking of acting in a way that goes against that belief, it's like our defenses and our heckles come up. But it's really important to recognize that feelings don't have to dictate our behaviors. We can feel it, but do something anyway. So learning to say no is about overriding and stepping beyond that inner anxiety. So some questions that you might like to consider. So if someone asks something of you, think about something like, if no one was to be disappointed by my decision, would I say yes or no? Because very often, as I mentioned, it's that idea of letting other people down that we're not so comfortable with. So sorry, I'm still thinking cardigan, I can't help it. So if no one was disappointed, would it really matter? Another question might be, would I feel comfortable making the same request of someone else? Or to consider about who is someone I know who's got well-established, good, healthy boundaries. How would they respond in that particular situation? But I guess the take-home message is just because it feels bad or doesn't actually mean it is. It just means we're coming up against a core belief of ours and often these core beliefs are actually not very helpful. Nobody is more important than you. Your needs are not less important than anybody else's. So these core beliefs that fight for survival tend to be negative and unhelpful. So it's about learning to feel it, but do it anyway. Okay, being more assertive, linked into saying no. What's really interesting is and again, if you were here, I would ask you, what is the definition of assertion? In actual fact, assertion is telling you in a manner that respects me and respects you, how I feel, what I want, or what I need. And that's it. So I tell you what I feel, want, or need in a manner that respects me and respects you. Being assertive is not about getting my own way. It's not about changing someone. If I engage in a discussion with someone and I'm actually trying to change their opinion or change their view, in theory, in reality, what I'm actually trying to do is I'm actually trying to change them. Therefore, I could be deemed aggressive or passive-aggressive in some way. I'm trying to dominate. So what we want to be doing with assertion is recognizing that it's simply me telling you what I want and what I need in a respectful manner. So respecting me means that I'm not going to do my nana. I'm not going to belittle myself and apologize for what I want or need. And respecting you means I do it in a way that I'm not aggressive and I'm not trying to be dominant or domineering. And by being assertive, it means that we don't take a back seat to our own lives, we actually start to consider what it is that we need and what we want. You know, if, for example, if you've got an exam coming up and you need to study for it, but your friend rings up, wants to have a chat, and you know that these chats are going to last far longer than the 5 minutes that they promise. It's about recognizing that I can say, you know what, I really want to talk to you, but I can't talk to you now. A really useful rule of thumb when looking at it as being assertive is to use what they call is I statements. So I feel, I need, I want. Reason being is twofold. First is that the I statement is about taking responsibility. So I'm saying this belongs to me. So I'm giving myself value. I'm giving my thought or my need or my idea value. But also what I'm doing is by using an I statement, I'm actually not allowing, I'm opening up the door to communication with you. So, for example, the opposite would be to use a statement like you make me, or you don't, or you think. And the minute we say to someone, you this or you that, I don't know if you can feel it even as I talk to you, but your heckles rise. It becomes almost like an attack. So the person that we're trying to engage with is actually going to respond in a defensive manner. So bring it back to that I statement, owning what it is that you want. In relationships, for example, if you need to be assertive, it's about using I statements like I feel, when you, because. But they are really important ways of being. Okay, taking control of your decisions really just simply means if something isn't working for you, make a change. So if you find watching the news stressful, don't watch the news. If you find shopping in a shopping mall excruciating, as I often do, think about being more organised and ordering online. It's about, you know, if being in traffic causes you stress or distress, think about, right, how can I find it? I might need to get up earlier and leave earlier, but I'll find a route that doesn't have that same degree of traffic. So it's about taking control and being proactive. And lucky last is managing your time better. A lovely, I guess, what's the word? I've lost the word. Symptom of stress is procrastination, so putting things off. Ideally, very often, a lot of our stress comes from our poor time management, running late, not being able to prioritise and the like. So really get a handle on managing your time. Use diaries, consider priorities, keep a schedule, and make sure you do allow time for me in that schedule, of course. Me as in you or the self. But managing your time effectively is incredibly important. Okay, so they're our gatekeepers. So let's move into that moment when the pressure's on and we need help and we need it now. So our reinforcements have been called in. The first one that we can look at is practicing mindfulness. Mindfulness is very much a buzzword at the minute, and I imagine perhaps for some of you, when we talk about mindfulness, you have images of hippies or yoga gurus and the like. In actual fact, mindfulness is simple. It is simply the practice of being in the moment. And if you think about it, that's incredibly rare. For many of us, we spend most of our time doing something, but our brain is 2 minutes down the track, 2 days down the track, 2 weeks down the track, thinking or worrying about things that are to come. So mindfulness is about being in the moment where you are at that time. And it's about disconnecting from our thoughts that cause us distress. We get so anchored in what's going on inside our head. So one activity that I can highly recommend that you try, and I used to do it, as I mentioned earlier, when working with the veterans, is about to simply be. So allow yourself 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, what I'd like you to think about doing is taking yourself somewhere that you find pleasurable. Ideally, I would suggest outside, somewhere in a garden setting or a green setting. But once you arrive at wherever it is that you decide you want to go, I encourage you to take a little measure of how stressed you're feeling in that moment. Because usually this is something we're talking about. These are the reinforcements, the things that we do when that stress starts to rise. So on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being totally chilled, no stress, 10 being the most stressed you've ever been in your life, think about how am I going to... sorry, my brain. So we're thinking about how stressed you're actually feeling in the moment. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to be in that space for 5 minutes. So what I mean by be in that space is to use your senses to ground you. Our 5 senses are absolutely brilliant at grounding us and enabling us to let go of stressful thinking in the moment. So when you're in this particularly pleasurable place, what you focus on is, first of all, or not first of all, but in no particular order, what you see. What can you see? Pay attention. Don't just look at the tree. Look at what kind of leaves are on the tree? How tall is the tree? Is it a bush? Is it a shrub? Is it a ground cover? Is it a full oak tree? So to really use and see what you can. What can you hear? Pay attention to the sounds. We spend a whole lot of time filtering out the sounds around us. So what can you see in that space? What can you feel? Ideally, if you've got the opportunity, shoes off, walk on the grass barefoot. What does it feel like? Engage, touch those leaves, touch the grass, touch whatever. Obviously, what can you smell? In a garden environment, this is particularly useful. Actually, for me, being by the ocean, that would just be absolutely beautiful. So what are the smells that surround you? Taste is a little trickier. Unless you're in an orchard, I wouldn't recommend tasting plants unless you're a better botanist than I, but, never discount it. It might play some role. So just for 5 minutes, experience that space. And by all means, set your timer. And at the end of that 5 minutes, what I would suggest you do then is actually retest and see how stressed you are. And I could virtually guarantee to you that the level of stress you'd be feeling from those simple 5 minutes would be significantly diminished. So it doesn't take a lot, but it's an incredibly powerful thing to do. So mindfulness is not about hours and hours and hours of navel gazing, but it's about engaging with the now, when I need it, to help me settle. I did mention using your senses to ground you, and part of the distress tolerance that's often taught through psychology is to look at these senses individually and have a list of things that are pleasurable within each one. I decided to put it to test when I was working at a private hospital here in Perth with veterans, and we'd have some very stressful and very busy periods. So I set up a station in my office where I had one thing that stimulated each of my senses in a positive way. So for sight, I had a picture of my husband and I in the snow. It was the first time I'd ever seen snow, so it was a really poignant picture for me. For sound, I had a relaxation CD, but I confess I often didn't have the time to find the CD player to cue it up to play it, but I had it there if I ever did. For taste, Nestle used to make in a tin, basically just choc buds, but it was like a hot chocolate. So you'd melt the buds in the chocolate and have the most amazing hot chocolate. The thing about it, though, was that when I had this hot chocolate, I had to focus on the act of having the hot chocolate. So it wasn't just about making it and gulping it down and running on. It was about making it and then sitting there and savouring it. So kind of feeling in my mouth, where does the sweet taste come from? And for example, trying to track the process of that warm drink from my mouth all the way down to my belly. It might have only taken me 2 minutes to drink it, but in that time, I had a complete disconnect from the stress that had been brewing in me prior to that point. For touch, I had bubble wrap. Oh, I love bubble wrap. I had enough so that I could either do the individual pop by pop if that was what I needed, or otherwise I had enough to do that good wrench. You had that very satisfying pop, 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 pop that goes with it. And what was the other one? Oh, smell was my last one. And for me, I love the smell of coffee, probably more than I actually like the taste. And to this day, I'm incredibly grateful that no one ever walked in to find me with my nose in my little jar of coffee beans, having a good old niff. But again, it was about connecting with the pleasure senses and that disconnect. So mindfulness isn't anywhere near as challenging as it sounds. It's just about connecting with the moment and using your senses to do something that's pleasurable, that enables you to break that stress cycle. Okay, speaking of stress cycles, the next thing we can do in the moment is to look at challenging our stressful thinking. Now, excuse me while I give you a bit of background first, because I think this is something that's quite important to explain. The actual act itself takes seconds to do, but I want you to understand why we suggest doing this. So hopefully, again, you can see my cursor. So with this little model here, when something happens, which is what we call the activating event, the first thing we tend to be aware of is how we feel about that event. So whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's, stress-inducing, pleasure-inducing, what have you. But in actual fact, this is actually not true, because we don't experience and then go straight to feelings. What actually has to happen is that situation has to be processed through our thinking. Now, for our younger viewers, this is meant to be a cassette tape. I hear giggles and groans as I do that. but CDs don't quite work in the same way, so they aren't very useful for my demonstration. So consider our brain, or our mind, if you will, as a cassette tape. And on this cassette tape are all the thoughts, feelings, experiences that we've got. And they've been put there over a lifetime. And they filter every experience that we have. And so it's what's on this tape that's going to colour and determine how we feel. So once we've determined how we feel about it, this then, of course, leads to behaviour. But let me give you an example. So if you think about it, that you've come into work and on your desk in front of you, there is a note that's from your boss that says, "See me ASAP." So that's our activating event. Now, if we were to run this through my tape, my thought box, I have to confess that my thoughts would be one of, what have I done now? I've not done something right. I've got something wrong. I'm in trouble in some way. So if I walk in there, or I have that thought goes through my brain, and that's how I perceive it, my feelings are feelings of stress, anxiety, distress, even if I'm really worried about what's going on. If I'm absolutely certain that I've done nothing wrong, I may well be quite irritable or disgruntled, thinking, well, why am I being called in for something that I didn't do? So those feelings are then, of course, going to dictate how I behave in that circumstance. If I'm feeling indignant, I'm going to walk in there ready for a fight to defend myself. If I'm feeling anxious and worried that I've done something wrong, I'm going to be quite meek. I'm going to be apologising before the boss has even had a chance to tell me what the issue is. So if we think about it, though, if we can change how we perceive that circumstance or that situation, that's going to have a flow-on effect through everything else. So if I can change that thought from one of negative thinking to one of more, doesn't have to be positive, but more neutral, as in, oh gosh, I wonder what that's about, as opposed to, that's it, I'm in terrible trouble, I'm going to feel about that event differently. And as a result, I'm going to behave differently. So, and this comes back to that 5 aspects model we talked about at the start, looking at that thinking and recognizing the power that our thoughts have over how we feel and therefore how we behave. So in this strategy, what we want to do is look at challenging those thoughts that pop into our heads, that thought that says, that's it, I'm done for, I'm in trouble, in this particular example. So what I did is I put together a couple of thought testing questions that you might be able to ask yourself if you realize that your thinking is actually contributing to the stress that you're experiencing in that moment. So these are questions something like, so what is my evidence for and against my thinking? Am I jumping to negative conclusions? I really like this one. Are there any other ways that I could see this situation? Because very often when we are stressed in particular, it's like our fight or flight response is activated. So we're actually looking for threat. So our natural response is to go for somewhere, is to find that threat. So very often we're not necessarily seeing the circumstance for what it is. Is there anything good about this situation? And the other one I really like is, what would I say to a friend who was thinking or acting in this way? If I was to sit down with a good friend that I trusted and discuss this circumstance, would I be looking at them and going, for goodness sake, what are you worried about? There's nothing here. So it's about that, again, that step back, that disconnect, and doing the reality test. The last question down there I've put down is the am I shoulding, and that is so incredibly important. It's a fascinating experiment, and I really encourage you to do it one day, is to set a little sort of internal alarm to go off each time you catch yourself saying, I should do something or I must do something. Shoulds and musts are a thinking error, a trap that we fall into all too often. And the problem with shoulds or musts is that when we should something or must something, we're putting a whole pile of pressure on ourselves to get that task done and opening ourselves up to feel bad if we don't get that task done. The issue with shoulds and musts is that very often the things that we're shoulding and we must be doing are actually not that important, because if they were, we would have done them already. So we're taking those secondary tasks that potentially aren't that important and we're making them an issue unnecessarily. We're adding stress, we're adding load, and there's actually no need for us to do that. So we tend to should and must things like, I really should clean the car, or I should wash the windows. Where, as I said, if it was really that important, they would have been done by now. What is also interesting is that we tend to use them almost as a punishment in some way. I should have done that, or I didn't do this. So what we can do to challenge the shoulds and musts, and it's really actually ironically quite simple, is change should to could. So it's literally a change of 2 letters. Rather than should, use the word could, because I bet you that internal alarm goes off more times than you realise it would in a day. So each time you catch yourself saying should, come back and say, no, hang on, I could do that. And again, wish you were here so I could ask you the question. But what could does is it gives us choice. With should, there is no choice. We just apply pressure and that's it, and we're stuck with it. We're bad if we don't achieve it. But if we could do it, it gives us the option. I can choose to do it or I can choose not to. And what it does do is it gives me a pause for thought. Why haven't I done it? And in some cases, there's probably a really good reason why I haven't done that particular task, because it's not a priority, it's not important, or what have you. But sometimes I might realise, actually, you know what, I'm procrastinating and I could do it, and it's something actually is really quite important, so I'm going to do that. But it also takes the pressure off if I recognise that this is not an important task for me. So it allows me to step back and go, actually, no, I'm not doing it. I can let that go. I'm not doing it for a really good reason. So my key trick of the day is change those shoulds to could. And it's quite freeing if you can get into the habit of doing so. Okay. All right. Lucky last strategy is our relaxation strategies. And there are loads of hobbies and activities that you can do that are based around relaxation principles. You've got your yoga, you've got your Tai Chi, you've got meditation, you've got guided imagery, all sorts of things that can be designed to help us to relax, which would fit into our gatekeeper strategies. But what we want to focus in on, I guess, as I mentioned earlier, is our relaxation strategies. So first one, and probably the most obvious one when I think about if I was to ask you what are some relaxation tips, is about our breathing and what we call the relaxing breath. So, I mean, we all know, it's that common practice. Someone starts to get wound up and we say, stop, take a deep breath. And we all know the power of breathing when it comes to invoking the relaxation response. What we tend to find is relaxation, to give you a bit of an insight into the stress response, is that the stress response is a primal primitive response. So it's in that primal part of the brain, that the earliest part of our brains when we look at brain development. And it determines, as I mentioned earlier, threat or risk. So when we're stressed, we tend to, if we're stressed enough and if it's long-term stress, hit fight or flight mode, which I'm sure you've all heard of. That is the way we either decide to stay and confront and fight the stressor or the threat, or we choose to flee and get away. Now, to do this, we have two systems. One's called the sympathetic nervous system, which is the on button. So something happens, and if we're going to hit fight or flight or a strong stress response, that is activated, and it's activated quickly. So it sets our body off. We have all, excuse me, all these unnecessary. We have all these reactions that are out of our control. So by that I mean we sweat, our heart rate increases because we're trying to pump blood around the body to the major muscle groups. We'll find that our breathing is short and sharp, again flooding the body with oxygen. So our muscles are ready to fight or flee the threat that we're experiencing. So we have all these things going on, and we're preparing to meet the threat or get away from the threat. So that's the stress response. The other side of the coin is what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is the off switch. The thing is that it's really quick to activate our on switch, but our off switch is slower. And if you think about it from a primal level, we don't want to switch off too quickly, because if we do, and the threat returns, we're going to find ourselves ill prepared. So the body in itself will quick stress mode on, but slow stress mode off. What our breathing does is deep breathing actually helps to activate that parasympathetic nervous system earlier than it would if we were left to our own devices. So it helps activate that counteractive, relaxing, anti-stress response. So it's actually really important and really effective. The thing to note about our breathing is, yes, of course, we all breathe without issue, but we're not talking about normal breath. The relaxing breath is about breathing in a manner that allows us to deepen our breathing, to slow our breathing, and to find the rhythm in our breathing, and using that to soothe us. So let's do a little experiment. I can't stand to show you, show the chins there, Laura. I want you to place one hand on the top of your chest, so here, high up here, and the other hand is going to go on your diaphragm. So for the ladies, that means that your thumb would rest just under your bust. For you guys, probably just under the pectoralis muscle there, that chest muscle, sort of almost where the belly is. So while I'm talking to you, what I want you to do is just to breathe. And the minute I say that, everyone kind of goes and kind of forgets how to breathe. But, you know, if it helps, read the screen. But I want you to be mindful of which hand moves. So when you breathe, is it your lower hand that's moving or is it your upper hand? So just take a breath or two. Oh, now that I've told you that, my lower hand's breathing, but I'm pretty sure that until that point, my upper hand was moving. If your upper hand is moving, it's indicating that you're shallow breathing. So it's that stress-induced breathing. We're not breathing to our full capacity. If your lower hand was the one that was moving, good on you, well done, because that is an example of what we call diaphragmatic or relaxed breathing. So well done. And the aim is that we want to be breathing from using our full lung capacity, so breathing right down into the base of our lungs, which would mean that the movement would start in our lower lungs, and then so it goes from our diaphragm, and the last place to rise is our chest. So we're focusing on breathing down. Now, it doesn't feel natural at first very often. So what I'm going to get you to do is to pop your fingertips together like this, okay? And you're going to place these hands now on your lower chest, your diaphragm. And when we breathe in and we do diaphragmatic breathing, what we're looking at is we're going to find that as we breathe in, our fingers are kind of going to come apart ever so slightly as we breathe in, and then return together as we breathe out. So when we're looking at breathing, really important couple of things to remember. First is to slow down. So not good. Let it go and breathe deep. And also, it's going to feel strange. Don't ever let yourself be feeling like you're out of breath or short of breath, but just focus on, as you breathe in, allow your lungs to fill completely from the bottom up to the top. And as you breathe out, make sure that you exhale fully. So just take a minute. That's why I check this. So just take a minute to breathe and feel the difference. Okay, breathing right down using that full lung capacity. I'm going to say well done and good. Oh my goodness, can you hear that? My phone's ringing. Isn't that ironic? Okay, so continue to breathe for me. And what I'm going to get you to do is a little exercise called thanks Karen, the 3-3-4 breathing exercise. And this is involving looking at how we breathe and trying to build upon that relaxing breath that we've got. And this exercise takes no time, it takes no effort, it is simple and it is easy to do in the moment when we're feeling stressed. So if it helps you, by all means leave your hands on your belly, but the important thing is being comfortable. So how I'm going to take you through it first, so that you're not then you can have a go. So the 3-3-4 indicates the time it takes to do each part of the breath. So it's about breathing in for a count of 3, holding that breath for a count of 3, and then breathing out for a count of 4. Because what we want to focus on is the exhalation, that exhalation of carbon dioxide and that expulsion of the air. So a couple of tips, it's breathing in through your nose. So as you breathe in, allow those lungs to fill completely for a count of 3, hold that breath for a count of 3, and then breathe out for a count of 4. Now, the reason that I get you to do it is if I try and count for you, I don't know what's comfortable for you. So just take a minute for now. I want you to practice that. So what they encourage you to do, if it helps, is to put your tongue behind your front teeth. And as you breathe out, almost like a breathy sound. So breathing in through your nose, hold that breath, and then breathe out. Okay, my phone's now making a strange noise. Keep going, I'll be right back, sorry. Breathing in, holding it, and breathing out. Okay, well done. Making sure that it's not too harsh or forced. Really well done, good job. Okay, All right. So that's our relaxing breath and our 3-3-4 breathing exercise. And I really, again, can be done. Hopefully what you're finding is actually, you might be feeling a bit, actually now think about it, a little bit lightheaded. That's absolutely fine. It's normal. It's about that flood of oxygen to the brain. So if you're doing some breathing practice and you find that you get a bit woozy, just let it go. Let your breathing go back to normal. When you're ready, just bring it back down again to that full deep breath. But I hope you're feeling a little more relaxed now than you were earlier. Okay, don't get too wound up because we're going to keep going with some relaxation. The next strategy is meditation, which is not something that I have to confess I'm very good at. Meditation is an excellent strategy, and it's about trying to control the thinking and eliminate stressful thought. And I believe ideally eliminate all thought and to just be. I find that incredibly difficult. I can relax my body beautifully, but my brain is going at 1 billion miles an hour. But some people absolutely swear by it. And for many, it's the journey of achieving that ability to meditate that in itself they find very soothing and empowering, I guess, almost. That idea of mastering your thinking, mastering your stress. There are a number of apps now that you can have that will assist you to do meditation practice throughout the day and help you work towards that. So please don't discount it. It might be the absolute perfect strategy for you. All I can say is it's just something that I find incredibly challenging to do. Okay, so we've got our breathing, we can meditate. And our third is looking at muscle relaxation. So I think this is a very good opportunity because I can feel it. Any muscle in our body can carry tension. Our eyelids can carry tension. Our jaw is incredibly, can carry a whole pile of tension. It's actually key to looking at relaxing is to, if you're feeling tense. In fact, if you are feeling a bit tense now, just see if you can relax the muscles of your jaw. Just feel that. Give it a bit of a wobble and just let it go. Let it hang. You might find your lips pop apart a bit. But they often suggest when it comes to pain management or stress management, release those jaw muscles and you'll find instantly there's a change in the tension in your whole body. But let's let me introduce you to a couple of stretches that you can do. If you can feel the tension building up in your shoulders, for example, I carry it all here and I can feel it right now. A couple of neck and shoulder stretches that you could use might be useful. Okay, so our first one that I want to focus in on is, a couple of tips first. First of all, when we're stretching, don't bounce. It's about a long extended stretch. It's not about forcing it and it's not about bouncing. Secondly, it's not about pain. So it's not about stretching till it hurts. It's about stretching until you feel that the tension in the muscle. It's not about doing it so hard that you cause yourself an injury. The recommended stretch time is 20 to 30 seconds. I'm probably not going to demonstrate that now, but that's something to keep in mind if you're going to look at effective stretching. And also stretch both sides of your body if it's applicable. So don't just, even though one shoulder might feel particularly tense, make sure that you stretch both. It's about that balance and keeping the body, remembering the body as a whole. It's more than just the sum of its parts. Okay, so our first one to stretch our neck and our trapezius. Trapezius is the muscle that runs from the base of your skull. It goes all the way down our necks to the edge of our shoulder, and then it comes down the back of our neck to end at about halfway down, sort of, or maybe a third of the way down our spine. So it looks a bit like a kite. If you just look at it, it looks a bit like a kite shape. Okay, so to stretch that, first of all, we can just do simple chin to chest. Oh, that feels so, I don't know about the rest of you, but that feels really good. Okay, and we would hold that for 20 to 30 seconds. And as with anything, the yin and yang, we then would want to stretch our head back. So tilting our chin up to the ceiling and head back. And you could repeat that if you feel that you need to work on that. Okay, the second part is the side tilt, ear to shoulder. Now I've got quite a dicky neck, so I can't get very fast. Some of you will be able to tilt a lot further than I am, but you'll start to feel that stretch down the side of trapezius. So you would hold that, and then to engage that stretch further is to tilt your head down towards the ground. So it's like you're looking down past your shoulder and down your arm. Oh, that feels so nice. That feels so good. I'm going to do the other side now. So tilting over to the other side, feeling that stretch all the way down trapezius, and then turning the head to look down on the angle, feeling that lovely stretch. Beautiful. Okay, so that's our trapezius muscle stretch. To look at stretching our arm and shoulder muscles further are the two classics that I'm sure you all know. So to stretch our triceps, it's about you bending your elbow to 90 degrees with your hand flat, if you can see, against your back. And very gently just pulling backwards with your other hand to stretch the triceps, which runs the way down here. While you're doing this, just encourage your shoulders to drop. So we're not sort of bringing our shoulders up towards our ears, our shoulders are down. And then if it's very short, but again, we will repeat the other side. And our lucky last is our bicep stretch, which is that stretch, sorry, I don't know if you can see. So we take our arm, we bring it across our body, drop the shoulder, keep it low. I wear my shoulders like earrings, but that's no excuse for you to do it. Holding that arm as we stretch across our body to feel that stretch right through from the shoulder through our bicep here, which is that internal muscle that bends our arm. And again, oh, that feels, honestly, that feels so good. I should have put this in earlier in the piece, I think. Okay, so there's some simple stretches we can do in the moment to help work through some of that tension. Coming on to that though also is our specific muscle relaxation, which can be progressive muscle relaxation and passive. I mentioned progressive muscle relaxation at the very beginning when we talked about that study that found the link between epilepsy, seizure frequency, and stress management. So progressive muscle relaxation is actually about using our muscles to invoke a relaxation response. So that particular exercise works on, we start off by, sorry, let me just find where I wanted to write. Yeah, no. So we start by thinking about our muscles as if they're in groups. So we would start, for example, ideally, I suppose this one in its own way is more of a gatekeeper, but it's if you've got some time, it's fantastic. You can do it sitting in your chair, you can do it lying down. But what we want to do is we start thinking of our muscles in groups. So for example, we'd start with our feet. So we would start by tensing the muscles in our feet. So by doing so, it might be we might want to point our toes towards the floor, or we might want to flex our feet back, whichever way works for you. But it's about creating a sense of tension in our feet. So we'd squeeze and hold, paying attention to how that, that tension in those muscles. And then we would release that tension. And we want to focus it on the sensation of relaxation. We're forcing that muscle to relax. Relaxed muscles feel soft, they feel long, and they feel kind of loose and heavier. So we would then do the same thing again, tensing the muscles and then relaxing the muscles in our feet. Remembering that when we're doing the tensing, we're not doing it to hurt. We're just doing it to a point where we feel some discomfort. So once we've done our feet, we then might focus in on our calves. So tensing and releasing our calves. Then we look at the muscles of our thighs to tense and then release. We look at the bottom. So there goes the flowers. Tensing the muscles in our buttocks and then allowing them to relax. We then would maybe move to the muscles of our stomach and then maybe our arms. So you can start with your hands, then start with the arm as a whole. So to tense your arm, you might choose to lift your arm up and hold it out with your hands as fists to feel that tension and then relax. So if you're doing it in a chair, when we're relaxing these muscles, it's about controlling them until you find the support that's been offered to you by, for example, the armrest or your lap, and then allowing them to relax completely. We then could tense the muscles in our head and in our face as well. So bit by bit, we work as muscles as a group. This can be really useful actually if you find it hard getting to sleep, because you can do it in bed. And ultimately what you want to do is as you relax each group of muscles, you should find that they start to feel heavier. The best one, in fact, you probably even do it now. Do it with me while we sit in the chair, or if you're lying down, lucky you. I want you to tense your buttocks. So tense those muscles that we're sitting on now. Tense and squeeze and really feel that tension. Hold it, keep squeezing, and now relax. Feel how your bottom, literally, it's like the muscles soften and spread out beneath you. And let go further. Really let your bottom sink down into the chair. Let the chair support your weight. Really good. One more time again. So really squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Hold it, and now release. Letting go, letting that bottom sink into the chair. Can you feel the difference? That's a clear distinction between what muscle tension feels like and what a soft, relaxed muscle feels like. And the idea of letting the chair support your weight is actually really useful. Generally speaking, if you're sitting in a chair at work and you're tense, just see if you can actually have a crack at letting the chair completely support you. So you're not holding yourself, you just let go and let the chair. It's actually quite challenging because you don't realize how tightly we can hold on to ourselves and our posture from time to time. Okay, so that's progressive muscle relaxation. Passive muscle relaxation is pretty much the same thing, except we don't tense first. So it's about thinking of your feet and trying to relax your feet, thinking about your calves and then relaxing your calves. So there's none of the tension first. So this might be more of a reinforcement strategy in the sense that you can sit there and just consciously let go of the muscles of your buttocks, for example. Let go of the chest muscles. Let go of your shoulder muscles. And as I mentioned, sitting in a chair and doing that, no one needs to know you're doing it, but you're actually consciously trying to invoke a relaxation response. So to finish, what I thought I might do is take you through what's known as the CALM exercise. And what this is it's an acronym. So it stands for parts of the body. So again, if you were here, I'd ask you, but C is chest, A is arm, L is legs, and M is mouth. But if you're interested, I thought I might take you through it as a little relaxation exercise. So I will talk you through it. You won't need to see me to do this. And you can see how it feels. And I'd love to get any feedback if you think it's worked for you. So I'm going to get you just to, if you don't mind, I can't see if you don't, so there's no pressure. But if you're willing to close your eyes and have a wiggle in your chair to make sure that you're feeling comfortable. And to start, we're just going to do some relaxing breaths. So in your own time when you're ready, I'm going to ask you to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. We're going to focus on allowing our breath to deepen, on allowing the rate at which we breathe to slow. Slow, even, deep breaths. They're not harsh or forced. In through the nose and out through the mouth. Just allow the body to find its own natural rhythm. Slow, deep, even breaths. And just say to yourself the word calm. So in your mind's eye, see the word as you say to yourself, calm. Just continue that slow, relaxed breathing. Saying to yourself, calm. Calm. And when you're ready, I'd like you to send your awareness to the muscles of your chest and your torso. And I want you to allow those muscles to relax. If you can, just allow your back and your torso to rest heavily against the chair. Being aware of that sensation of lengthening and softening as the muscles relax. Slow, relaxed breaths. And once again, saying to yourself, calm. See the word in your mind's eye. Calm. And send your awareness now to your arms, from your shoulders, down to your elbows, forearms, wrists and hands. And just allow them to sag. Allow your shoulders to drop. Allow your arms to rest heavily, perhaps in your lap or on the arms of the chair, letting go of any tension or tightness, relaxing, softening, even, relaxed breathing. And when you're ready, once again, say to yourself, calm, seeing the word in your mind's eye, calm. And send your awareness now to your legs. If they're crossed, just gently uncross them. Allow them to rest heavily in the chair. And allow your legs to relax. Allow them to be loose. Allow them to let go. Feel your thighs sinking down into the chair as the muscles of your legs relax. And your breathing remains slow and even and deep. And when you're ready, say to yourself the word calm. See the word in your mind's eye. And finally, we're going to move now to the muscles of your mouth and jaw. And I want you to allow those muscles to relax. As I mentioned, you may find your lips part slightly. And allow the muscles of your mouth and jaw to relax. Give them a bit of a wiggle if it helps. And your breathing remains slow and even and deep. And say to yourself the word calm. Your whole body is heavy and warm and relaxed. Your breathing is soft and even and deep. And you are calm. Just take a moment now to enjoy the sensation of relaxation. If thoughts come into your mind, just acknowledge them, but let them pass on through, and bring your awareness back to the word calm. Relaxed, even breathing. Calm. And as much as I would like you to leave you there in that relaxed state, I need you to start to reconnect. So give your fingers and toes a gentle wiggle for me. Just gently. When you're ready, opening your eyes, having a stretch. Really enjoy it. If you don't mind, I might join in with that. Oh, have a stretch. Enjoy that stretch. Arms up and above your head. Okay, I'm going to assume that you're out of your relaxed state now. Hopefully that you actually went into one. That's all I had to share with you today. As I mentioned, I'm hoping that you're so relaxed that that you'll forget to ask me some curly questions. But this is the time to do that if you would like to. So If you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. Any comments or feedback that you'd like to share with everybody else, that would be fantastic. Just let me know. Here we go. Okay. Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure, Ian. Thank you so much for attending. If you are finished, then I am more than happy for you to you can just shut down and log off the meeting. I'll remain online for a little while. If anyone else would like to ask me any questions or any further questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure to share with you. I hope you enjoyed it and got something useful out of it. Just to take you through, to remind you what we talked about today, we talked about the link between seizures and stress. We looked at the 5 aspects of life model. I encouraged you to consider what your own personal picture of stress was. And then we looked at some strategies. So we had our gatekeepers, which were our lifestyle choices, boundaries and self-care. And then we had the reinforcements that we call for in the moment, which were our mindfulness, our challenging stressful thinking, and our relaxation. This has been recorded, so the hope being that we'll be able to post it online. So if you want to revisit and have a look at that later on to revisit anything, you are more than welcome. But again, I'll remain online for a little while if you've got any questions. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Have a lovely day, and I hope that you might join us for our next webinar in around a month's time. Yet to be announced as to what the topic will be, but we'll let you know as soon as we've got that set up. Thank you again. Have a great day, and I'm here if you've got any questions. Thanks. Oh, here we go. Thanks. So don't hesitate to switch off. I won't be at all upset if in any way as you. I can see when you log off, and that's absolutely fine. So please don't hesitate to do so. So just log off as you need to. And when you're all gone, then I'll chuff off as well. Bye.